He was the undisputed king of the stage, and she was the screen siren who conquered Hollywood. But behind the flashbulbs, their fairy tale romance was rotting from the inside out. It was a private hell fueled by blood-spattered handkerchiefs, manic violence, and public humiliation. Decades later, an elderly Laurence Olivier would be found weeping before an old film, haunted by the woman he couldn't save. How did the love story of the century turn into a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions? To understand the tears of an old man, we must rewind to the moment the golden couple began to lose their shine. By 1940, Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were supposed to be untouchable. They starred together in films like 21 Days Together and That Hamilton Woman, projecting an image of unified perfection. But when they took that chemistry to Broadway for a production of Romeo and Juliet, reality came crashing down. The critics were ruthless. Time magazine didn't just review the play. They attacked the couple personally, linking their scandalous, adulterous beginnings to their performance on stage. It wasn't just an artistic failure. It was a financial catastrophe that drained tens of thousands of dollars from their own life savings. Bruised and nearly broke, the couple retreated to England in 1943 to support the war effort. Olivier joined the Fleet Air Arm, finding purpose in duty, while Vivien embarked on a grueling tour through North Africa in 1944 to entertain the troops. She pushed herself to the limit, flashing that famous smile for the soldiers, but her body was quietly failing. What started as a persistent cough soon escalated into terrifying fits of fever. The diagnosis was grim: tuberculosis in her left lung. For weeks, Vivien lay in a hospital bed, isolated and terrified. During this separation, Olivier's letters to her were frantic, revealing a man deeply dependent on her existence. He wrote from Paris, begging for medical reports, confessing that he was a hideously selfish man who somehow loved her more than he loved himself. It was a testament to their intensity, but also a warning sign of the codependency that would later suffocate them. Doctors advised her to stop acting, to rest, to breathe. But Vivien Leigh didn't know how to stop. She threw herself back into work for the filming of Caesar and Cleopatra in 1945. Then tragedy struck again. While filming on the slick, polished sets, Vivien slipped and fell hard. The physical trauma resulted in a miscarriage, shattering her hopes for a child with Olivier. This loss wasn't just physical. It broke something in her mind. The grief sent her spiraling into a deep, dark depression that looked unlike anything Olivier had seen before. She would collapse on the floor in hysterical crying fits, inconsolable and unreachable. This was the beginning of the end, though neither of them knew it yet. It was the first true manifestation of her bipolar disorder. Olivier began to notice a terrifying pattern. Vivien would undergo days of frantic hyperactivity, a manic high where she was unstoppable. Then she would crash. The depression would hit like a tidal wave, followed by a total breakdown involving uncontrollable shivering and tirades filled with foul, shocking profanity that seemed to come from a different person entirely. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part was the aftermath. When the episode passed, Vivien often had no memory of the violence or the swearing. She would wake up confused, seeing the hurt in the eyes of those around her, and feel an overwhelming, crushing guilt. She tried to take a break from filming, but she never fully recovered her strength. Her performance in Caesar and Cleopatra suffered, and for the first time, her professional reputation began to wobble. But while Vivien was fighting a war within her own mind, Laurence Olivier's career was launching into the stratosphere. He was no longer just an actor, he was becoming a legend. As he prepared for a tour of Henry IV and Oedipus, the power dynamic in their marriage began to shift drastically. Vivien was no longer his equal partner in the spotlight. She was becoming a liability, a fragile bird he had to protect. Olivier was soon knighted at Buckingham Palace, a monumental honor that officially made Vivien Lady Olivier. To the outside world, this was the pinnacle of success. But behind closed doors, this new title only widened the chasm between them. As Sir Laurence Olivier thrived, soaking in the adulation of the British Empire, Lady Olivier was sinking deeper into the darkness. They decided to embark on a 6-month tour of Australia and New Zealand in 1948, ostensibly to raise funds for the theater. It was meant to be a triumph. Instead, it became a traveling nightmare. Vivien was plagued by severe insomnia, unable to sleep, her mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. There were nights she physically couldn't go on, forcing her understudy to take the stage while she recovered in the shadows. Arguments became their new normal. Olivier found himself increasingly unable to manage her erratic mood swings. The patience he had shown in his letters was wearing thin, replaced by frustration and exhaustion. The tension was building like pressure in a steam pipe, waiting to blow. It finally exploded backstage in Christchurch, New Zealand. The argument started over something trivial, a pair of missing shoes. But it wasn't about the shoes. It was about years of fear, resentment, and illness. Vivien refused to go on stage. In a moment of pure, raw frustration, Olivier did the unthinkable. He slapped her across the face in front of the cast and crew. Without missing a beat, Vivien slapped him back. Minutes later, she walked onto the stage in borrowed shoes, a dazzling smile plastered on her face, delivering her lines as if her heart wasn't breaking. The audience roared with applause, completely unaware of the violence that had just occurred behind the curtain. But for Olivier, the applause rang hollow. He would later look back on that tour with a chilling realization. He might have returned to England with Lady Olivier, but he had lost his Vivien somewhere in Australia. Yet, even as their marriage crumbled into dust, Vivien was about to take on the role that would define her career and destroy her sanity completely. Despite the violence in Australia and the fracturing of their bond, Vivien Leigh possessed a resilience that bordered on masochism. She refused to let the marriage die, and she refused to let her career fade. In 1949, she stepped into the role that would become her legacy, and ultimately her undoing. She was cast as Blanche Dubois in the West End production of A Streetcar Named Desire. It was a casting choice that seemed almost cruel in hindsight. Blanche was a fading Southern belle, fragile, mentally unstable, and clinging to the remnants of her past glory while hiding from the harsh lights of reality. Vivien wasn't just playing Blanche, she was living her. The play was a massive commercial success, leading to the 1951 film adaptation that would immortalize her performance. But the line between the character and the woman began to dissolve. For 9 months in London, and then again on the film set, Vivien inhabited the mind of a woman going insane. She later confessed that playing Blanche tipped me over into madness. The exhaustion was absolute. She was mining her own trauma, her own bipolar highs and lows, to feed the camera. The world applauded her genius, giving her critical acclaim, but they were unknowingly applauding her mental deterioration. While the public worshipped her, the critics began to sharpen their knives. In 1951, while starring alongside Olivier in dual productions of Antony and Cleopatra and Caesar and Cleopatra, Vivien faced a brutal attack from the influential film critic Kenneth Tynan. Tynan didn't just dislike her performance, he dismantled her existence as an artist. He argued that Vivien was a mediocre talent, a beautiful weight around the neck of the brilliant Laurence Olivier. He claimed her presence was actively dragging Olivier's genius down into the mud. For a woman already teetering on the edge of insecurity, this was a lethal blow. Vivien became fixated on this failure. She ignored the thousands of fans who adored her and obsessed over Tynan's words, terrified that she was indeed the anchor sinking her husband's ship. In a desperate attempt to reassure herself and Olivier, she wrote to him constantly when they were apart. Her letters from this period are heartbreaking artifacts of a dying romance. "Oh, sweet Bubba," she wrote in August 1950, If we were together, I expect this would seem quite exciting. Whenever you think of me, my Larry boy, you will know I am with you." She was clinging to pet names and past memories, trying to write a reality where they were still the happy lovers of the past. But ink on paper couldn't fix what was broken. The romance they were barely holding together was dissolving like sugar in hot water. By 1953, the precarious house of cards finally collapsed. Vivien arrived in Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, to film Elephant Walk. The heat, the isolation, and the pressure were the perfect storm for a catastrophe. Almost immediately upon arrival, she suffered a massive nervous breakdown. It wasn't just a mood swing, it was a complete departure from reality. She began an affair with her co-star, the rugged English-Australian actor Peter Finch. But this wasn't a calculated betrayal, it was a symptom of her mania. Vivien was erratic, unable to control her impulses. She was sent back to Britain in a state of incoherence. When the fog lifted enough for her to speak, she confessed the affair to Olivier. The details of her breakdown were harrowing. Reports surfaced of Lady Olivier wandering naked through the gardens at night, hallucinating, and completely detached from the world around her. There were whispers of her falling into bed with strangers, driven by a hypersexuality that is often a symptom of bipolar mania. She wasn't cheating to hurt Olivier. She was cheating because she had lost the ability to stop herself. It is unlikely this was the first time Olivier had heard of her unfaithfulness. He knew the pattern, he knew the illness, but whether out of love, duty, or a fear of public scandal, neither of them pulled the plug on the marriage just yet. They were locked in a tragic dance. Olivier listened to her confessions, perhaps seeing them not as sins, but as wounds. They attempted to continue working together, appearing on stage side by side, but the audience could feel the chill. The electric chemistry that had once defined them was gone, replaced by a stiff, painful professionalism. Their performances suffered because they could no longer look each other in the eye without seeing the betrayal and the sickness that lay between them. During a production of South Sea Bubble, a glimmer of hope appeared. Vivien learned she was pregnant again. For a brief moment, it seemed like a second chance, a way to heal the rift with new life. She withdrew from the play to protect the baby. But fate was cruel. After her final performance, the physical and emotional stress proved too much. She suffered another miscarriage. The loss sent her plunging back into the abyss. This time, the depression lasted for months. She was inconsolable. When she eventually returned to tour with Olivier for Titus Andronicus, the backstage area became a war zone. Her grief manifested as rage. She would launch into frequent public outbursts, screaming at her husband and the crew, her voice echoing through the theater, a ghost of the woman she used to be, haunting the man she still loved. Here are Part 5 and Part 6 of the script. Part 5. The Edge of the Cliff. By 1958, the masquerade was finally coming to an end. For nearly a decade, Vivien and Larry had played the part of the happy couple for the cameras, smiling through grit teeth while their private world burned to ash. But the exhaustion of keeping up appearances had drained them both dry. Vivien, lucid enough in her calmer moments to see the wreckage, considered the marriage to be over. She began seeking solace in the arms of actor Jack Merivale. Merivale was different. He wasn't a titan of the stage competing for the spotlight. He was a caretaker. He knew about her tuberculosis, he understood her fragility, and he made a solemn promise to Olivier that he would look after her. It was a changing of the guard, a tacit acknowledgement between men that Vivien was a responsibility that needed to be managed. Meanwhile, Olivier found his own escape route. He began an affair with actress Joan Plowright, a woman 22 years his junior. She offered him something Vivien no longer could: stability, youth, and a fresh start free from the ghosts of the past. But knowing the end was near didn't make it easier for Vivien. The instability of her romantic life, combined with the relentless pressure of her fading career, accelerated her mental decline. By 1960, The depression had turned lethal. Vivien began threatening suicide. She was no longer just manic or difficult. She was in mortal danger. Olivier, watching from a distance, described her condition with a haunting poetic sadness that only he could muster. "Vivien is several thousand miles away," he said, trembling on the edge of a cliff, even when she's sitting quietly in her own drawing room. He realized that no amount of love could pull her back from that precipice. He was watching a woman constantly on the verge of falling, and the terror of it was destroying him too. In May of 1960, the inevitable finally happened. The divorce proceedings began. It was the legal death certificate of the century's greatest romance. The divorce was finalized later that year, and Olivier wasted no time moving forward. He married Joan Plowright and built the domestic life he had always craved, eventually having a son and 2 daughters. Vivien was left with her title, her demons, and a new partner who loved her, but she was forever severed from the man she called Larry Boy. However, a piece of paper couldn't erase 20 years of obsession. Even as they built separate lives, the silence between them was deafening, and soon they would find ways to break it. Divorce usually signals the end of communication, but for Leigh and Olivier, the bond was too deep to be severed completely by a judge. They continued to write to one another, their letters serving as echoes from a ruined empire. These weren't the fiery, passionate love letters of 1939. They were gentle, sorrowful notes of apology and forgiveness. They were the correspondence of 2 survivors who had lived through a war together. In one particularly gut-wrenching letter regarding their divorce, Olivier poured out his guilt and gratitude. "I want to say thank you for understanding it all for my sake," he wrote. "You did nobly and bravely and beautifully, and I am very, oh so sorry, very sorry, that it must have been such hell for you." It was a rare admission from the great actor, an acknowledgement that while he had suffered, her existence inside her own mind had been a living hell. Despite the heartbreak, Vivien refused to vanish into obscurity. She enjoyed continued success on the stage and the silver screen, proving that her talent remained untouched, even as her spirit frayed. But the shadow of depression was always there, a constant companion waiting in the wings. She poured every ounce of her remaining energy into her performances, using the stage as her only true sanctuary. Her final film role came in 1965 with Ship of Fools. It was a production that tested the limits of human endurance. Vivien was physically withering away, her body frail and racked with illness. Her mental state was so fragile that she would often fall into fits of paranoia, picking fights with other actors and disrupting the set. Every day of filming was a battle against her own biology. Yet, when the cameras rolled, she delivered. Her appearance in the film stands today as a testament to her sheer will. She managed to finish the project, and her performance received rave reviews. Critics called it brave, recognizing the pain etched into her face was real. But the physical toll of that final performance had drained the last reserves of her strength. The clock was ticking, and the final curtain was about to fall. By May of 1967, Vivien Leigh was preparing for a role that seemed almost prophetic, the lead in Edward Albee's play, A Delicate Balance. But the balance she had maintained for so long was finally tipping. During rehearsals, the old enemy returned. The tuberculosis that had plagued her since the war flared up with a vengeance, ravaging her lungs. Doctors ordered strict bed rest for several weeks, confining the once vibrant star to the silence of her home. She was grounded, trapped in a body that was rapidly quitting on her. On a quiet evening in July, her partner Jack Merivale left her at their Eaton Square apartment to perform in a play nearby. It was a routine night. When he returned around midnight, he peeked into the bedroom and saw Vivien asleep. Relieved, he went to the kitchen, but something gnawed at him. 30 minutes later, he checked on her again. This time, the silence was different. He found her body on the floor. It appeared she had attempted to walk to the bathroom, gasping for air as her lungs filled with liquid, and collapsed before she could reach the door. She had drowned on dry land, alone in the dark. The woman who had commanded the attention of millions had died in solitary struggle on her bedroom floor. Panic set in. Merivale frantically tried to revive her, but the warmth was already leaving her skin. He moved her body back onto the bed, arranging her as if she were simply sleeping, a final act of tenderness to preserve her dignity. Then he made the call that everyone had dreaded. He didn't just call the doctor. He called Laurence Olivier. Laurence Olivier was fighting his own battle at the time, confined to a hospital bed while undergoing treatment for prostate cancer. But when the news reached him that Vivien was gone, he didn't hesitate. Disregarding his own pain and medical advice, he discharged himself and rushed to Eaton Square. He had to see her one last time. When he arrived, the scene that greeted him was a tragic tableau. There lay Vivien, the love of his life and the source of his greatest torment, silent on the bed. Olivier, the man who could command any stage, was reduced to a broken figure. He stood over her body, weeping openly. In that quiet room, stripped of titles and fame, he began to pray. He didn't pray for her soul. He prayed for himself. He stood there and asked for forgiveness for all the evils that had sprung up between us. It was a confession of guilt, a recognition of the anger, the slaps, the betrayals, and the years of misunderstanding that had driven them apart. He stayed with her, guarding her body until the undertakers arrived to take her away. It was the final scene of their long, tortured drama. On July 8th, the world officially said goodbye. In a tribute fit for royalty, every theater in London's West End extinguished their marquee lights for 1 full hour. The Great White Way went black in her honor. A memorial service was held at St. Martin-in-the-Fields, and her cremated ashes were spread on the quiet waters of the lake at her summer home, Tickeridge Mill, in East Sussex. But the story didn't end with the funeral. 5 weeks before she died, Olivier had sent her one final letter. It was a simple note, signed with the tenderness of a bygone era. "Sincerest love, darling, your Larry." He had reached out one last time before the silence took her. And though he would live for another 2 decades, Vivien Leigh never truly left him. Laurence Olivier survived Vivien Leigh by 22 years. In those 2 decades, he cemented his status as the greatest actor of the 20th century. He built a stable, respectable life with Joan Plowright, raising a family and enjoying the domestic peace that Vivien could never give him. He grew old, his hair turned white, and his body grew frail. To the world he had moved on. He was the survivor of a shipwreck who had found safety on a new shore. But those closest to him knew that safety is not the same thing as passion. Vivien was gone, but she remained a permanent resident in the architecture of his mind. She became a phantom limb, a part of him that was severed, yet still ached as if it were there. He spoke of her rarely in public, perhaps because the wound was too deep, or perhaps because he felt guilty for surviving when she had not. But in the quiet moments of his old age, the memories would return, unbidden and sharp. He died of renal failure on July 11, 1989, at his home in West Sussex, at the age of 82. But even on his deathbed, the narrative of his life was inextricably bound to the woman he had buried in 1967. It is said that time heals all wounds, but for Olivier, time only seemed to clarify the tragedy. He had achieved everything a man could want: fame, fortune, knighthood, and family. Yet there was a void that no amount of accolades could fill. The psychological toll of their relationship had been immense. He had spent years as her caretaker, her victim, and her savior, trapped in a cycle of bipolar highs and lows. When he was finally free of the chaos, he found that the silence was almost deafening. He had traded the fire for the hearth, and while the hearth was warm, he never forgot the heat of the flames. As his health failed and the end approached, Olivier spent more time looking backward than forward. He began to review the footage of his life, literally and metaphorically. The anger of the divorce, the scandal of the affairs, and the bitterness of the slap in New Zealand had all faded away. What remained was the distilled essence of what they had shared before the illness took over. He wasn't remembering the sick woman on the floor. He was remembering the vibrant beauty who had charmed the world. The true end of this story isn't a funeral. It is a single, quiet moment in a living room shortly before Olivier's death. A friend entered the room to find the elderly actor sitting alone, bathed in the glow of a television screen. He was watching an old film starring Vivien Leigh. He was watching the ghost of the woman he loved, young and radiant, captured forever in celluloid perfection. The friend noticed tears streaming down the old man's face. Olivier didn't look away. He stared at the screen, entranced by her image, and whispered a realization that had taken a lifetime to accept. He said simply, This was love. It wasn't the safe kind of love. It wasn't the kind of love that ends in a rocking chair on a porch. It was a love that burned, a love that destroyed, and a love that defied death. Today, Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier are reunited in history, their names spoken in the same breath, symbols of a passion too large for the real world to contain. They achieved immortality, but the price of admission was their happiness. What do you think? Was their relationship a romantic tragedy or a toxic warning? Would Olivier have been better off if he had never met her? Or was the pain worth the magic they created? If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's most tragic legends. And let me know in the comments below. Do you believe true love is supposed to hurt this much? I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you in the next one. I'll see you in the next